Okay, thank you very much for coming here today. And today I'm going to take you on a journey to explore the potential benefits of insurance as a tool to manage risky conservation tenders. But before we begin this journey, I'd like to acknowledge the support of my supervisors, Steve and Said, Peter, Uwe, for their support, my social network, and all of you for being there for me. Then let's get back to our journey. Over the past few decades, conservation agencies across the globe have been using market-based instruments such as conservation tenders to encourage landholders to conserve, protect, and preserve the environment. And why is this important? Because our world is now confronted with climate change, and this is actually a problem, not just for Australia, but all of us as a society. And therefore conservation and environmental protection becomes very important. So what is a conservation tender? So the concept of conservation tender, it's different from what we know of a standard auction mechanism. So in a conservation tender, we have two main parties. We've got the buyer, who is the conservation agency in this case, and then we have the sellers, who are the service providers, if you like. So how does this work? In a conservation tender, it's the lower the bid you submit, the higher the chance that you win the tender. So here the buyer or the conservation agency will rank from the least cost, here's an example, and will start selecting until a given budget is met, or a given target, or a given budget is exhausted, or a given target is met. So this gives us an idea of what a conservation tender actually looks like. So the lower the bid, the higher the chance you win. The higher the bid, then you'll be around here and you might miss out. Therefore, when designing these conservation tenders, there's always been an assumption that the service providers, or the landholders in this case, know the actual cost of delivering environmental goods or services. But in reality, we are confronted with various risks, for example, climate or variation in different prices, and this will expose farmers in income stability. For example, look at this farmer. He had his own produce and he was looking forward to a very good harvest. But then something happened and he's lost everything. So when they're designing these tenders, it's important for governments to also consider that farmers are exposed to all this risk and they have to be protected. Therefore, our motivation is we are confronted with risks, so what can we do about it? So we will look at how do we improve or enhance the cost effectiveness of conservation tenders, while also encouraging people to participate in the conservation programs. And then we asked ourselves, okay, if people are participating, then how can we reduce the risk that they are exposed to? So we are looking at mitigation of this example cost risk by the use of a given risk management strategy. So in our case, we will focus mostly on insurance. Okay, I'll just give you an example of how a given insurance mechanism might work. So in this case, we have an income protection insurance, because this was our main focus. So for example, you as a farmer, you say, well, you have an expected yield, which is given by that amount. So this is what you agree, well, I expect to have this amount. So you pass that on to an insurance company, you say, well, given anything, I want to be at least there. So guaranteed yield is what the insurance company actually, so in case of any situation, that's the amount that you have, given any circumstance. So you've got your expected and guaranteed, it's what you and the insurance company agree on. And assume that you have a given event, loss event. So in this case, one, this person is above the guarantee yield, so happy days, no problem. But in this case two, you have your guarantee is about 7 and you got about 3. So the insurance company, what we're calling indemnity, will indemnify you until the guarantee. So you have this protection here. So at least you're always on the guarantee level. And then the last case where you lose everything, so the insurance company will compensate you up to the guarantee yield. So that's just an example for how an insurance mechanism can work. Next, so our main findings, we see that in our design, we see that if you offer an insurance, for example, income protection, we see that landholders tend to submit lower bids, and then this means that the conservation agency is able to cost effectively allocate the given conservation programs because it's very cheap. So we have lower bids, and then ultimately we have cost-effective allocation of the contract. So why is this important? We've seen in literature that there's problems in terms of allocation of contracts and actually what people actually see on ground. For example, in Australia, we see that over the past quarter decade, over $7 billion have been spent, and we see that, as we can see here, that the national audit repeatedly, that word was there, repeatedly, it's seen that we've not had enduring outcomes. So the outcomes, we don't have a sustainable provision of environmental goods or services. So elsewhere in the European Union, we see that we have problems with regards to cost effectiveness, and then we see also some of these, the actions were not adequately ensured, and also we also see that there's lack of, I don't know what's happening this way. Oh, yeah. There's lack of detailed evaluation. So what we see on ground and what actually happens, there's that mismatch. So it's very important for conservation agency to also account for what we are spending versus what we actually achieve, and that will be seen based on what actually happens on the ground. Therefore, with all that in mind, our main research question is, what is an impact of an embedded insurance on the performance of a given conservation tender? So in this case, embedded means the insurance contract is integrated within the design of the contract. And why the target constraint? Here we just focus on target, but you could extend that to a budget constraint. So target means that you have a given target that you want to make. For example, I want to plant 10,000 trees, or I want to conserve a given area. With a budget constraint, it's the same concept. You will be able to use the same concept and still achieve the same results, or a little bit different. And for us, we will look at 3 performance indicators. So here we have budgetary cost effectiveness. So this is for every unit of an environmental benefit that you get, how much do you actually pay for that per unit? So this is standardized version. So cost of getting that particular good that you want. And then economic cost effectiveness is the actual cost of doing the job. So for the farmer, I will spend, let's say, $100 to plant, let's say, 100 trees. So that is the actual cost of doing the job. And then the last performance indicator, it's rent per unit ratio, which is defined as how much profit you're extracting from the system. So these are the 3 main indicators that we'll look at the very end when I'm discussing our results. All right. So our focus here today, we could look at it from the bidder's perspective. We've done that before. So here we're only going to look at the problem from the regulator's perspective because of the importance of the problem. And here we have an optimal budget allocation model that we designed, and with a given environmental target. That's what it's called, a target constraint. So you have a predetermined target. And then to assess our performance, we have 3 scenarios that we look at. So we have the uninsured scenario, which is our baseline. So we see that if you don't have any insurance, what actually happens? How much are you actually spending? And then you have insured without subsidies, so where the farmers are actually paying for their own insurance. And then the last bit, we have insured with a flat rate premium subsidy. That means the government offers to subsidize the premium. So if you are to pay $100 for premium, the government can decide to give zero means you don't have any subsidy, so you're paying $100. Or it could be fully subsidy where you don't pay. It's like free insurance, if you like, or anything in between. So we will look at how sensitive is, if you give 0, 20, 40, 50, up to 100. So look at all that spectrum. All right, our case study is a nitrogen management program. So the Conservation Agency wishes to encourage farmers to minimize the use of nitrogen because it's leaching to the water bodies and then affecting public health and all that. So that is our particular example that we're looking at, but you could extend it to any other program. So to summarize that, we have the Conservation Agency wishes to attain maximum environmental benefits while minimizing the cost of doing the job. So those are two main points that we're looking at in our optimal budget allocation model. Okay, so this is to just run you through our conceptual framework. We have in a conservation tender, it's made of stages, so it's more chronological, if you like. So we've got expression of interest. So you as a farmer, you'll be like, I'm interested in this program. And then after that, you'll be like, oh, okay, how much would that cost me to do this job? So that's pre-bid preparation stage. So you're consulting with consultants or your friends or any person. So you want to get the gist of what's actually happening. And then once you have a rough idea of what the program will cost you, then you will decide to formulate your bid. You say, okay, if I'm to spend $10 to do this job, I can ask for $12 and then I have $2 as my profit. So you decide and then you submit your bid. And then after that, you say, well, with $12, should I participate or not? So that's the next stage. So if you decide to participate, you will then submit your optimal bid. Otherwise, you'll be like, oh no, I'm not interested. I will just carry on my conventional farming method. Yeah. And, okay. So just to give us a summary of, when farmers are formulating their bid and estimating their profit with the given 3 scenarios that we had introduced earlier, we see that with the uninsured, just 3 key parameters that we're looking at. We've got probability of suffering a given loss, and then we have got estimated profit, and then you've got magnitude. So how big is that loss? So in loss state, it means that you will lose this omega, what we're calling magnitude of loss. So that's it. And then if there's no loss, that's fine. You get your estimated profit. Let's look at the next scenario where we have you're insured, but you're paying your own premium. So that's insured without subsidy. So before we go to that, we see that here, when you have loss, your income is actually lower than when you have no loss. So just keep that in mind. So without subsidy, we see that you've transferred this loss, this expected magnitude, with what here. So this is given by Q times omega, that's expected loss. So in our case, we assume that that's our premium. So for example, if your magnitude is say $10 and the insurance company assesses and see, well, the chance of you suffering that $10 is say 10%. So it means that for them to take the $10 and then they will insure you against the $10 by paying 0.1 times 10, which is at $1. So you pay $1 in exchange of $10. Does that make sense? Are you all following me? So you pay a premium of $1, but you're protected against this loss. So here, what's the difference between, if you can have a look, what's the difference between this state and that state? What's the difference? What's the main difference you can see? Anyone? Yes? Mm-hmm. So yeah, so we see that here the income in both loss and no loss state is the same. So in a way, it's ensured income stability for this particular farmer. So you know, okay, whether I'm in loss or no loss state, I have the same income. Doesn't matter. So you don't have this variability here. So here you're not insured, but you know, if there's no loss, it's good for you. But if there's loss, then it's not good. But here you don't have to worry about any loss because you've transferred that to the insurance company. You only have to worry about this premium. And then the last scenario is insured with a flat rate. So here we've just considered extreme case where the conservation agency pays. So again here, what's the difference? What do we see? We see that both loss and no loss, we have income stability. So regardless of whether the farmer is paying or not paying the premium, we have the income stability in both states. Okay. But when assuming that you have actually estimated your profit and then you want to submit your bid, you're faced with that trade-off. If you have to submit high bids, then you risk not getting selected. You miss out. But if you submit low bid, then you know, okay, in case of an event and I'm not insured, then you are likely to face a guaranteed loss. So here you have to balance. You have to balance your profit seeking, so high profit, yeah, high bid, versus the high risk. So an event, let's say bushfire or anything that will disadvantage your farming enterprise. So the landholder has to balance these two aspects, so high bid and low bid. Okay, so to just recap, we see that we have two main stages in a conservation tender. We have the program design, that's more from the regulators or conservation agencies perspective, and then the tendering stage, that's mostly from the landholder's perspective. So they design the program, and then farmers are invited, express interest, and then they submit their bid. And then now we will now go ahead and look at the post-bidding stage. So in our case, our model setup, as we said, we will focus on conservation agency. Here, our selection criteria has got three main elements. You have got your environmental target. So it will be a budget. If it was a budget constraint, we'll have a budget. And here we have a size of winning groups. So depending, the bigger the target, the more the people you need. And then we have landholders bid price. So this is the unit per unit of environmental benefit that you're actually paying for. And okay, so to summarize our budget minimization problem, we have, so assuming that you have all these are representative landholders. So you've got 1, 2, 3, could be up to 100. I've just used up to 3. So our algorithm, what it does, it looks for optimal. So for a given target, so you have this tree, you say, well, you have a feasible set. So feasible set represents the target that you are seeking. So for example, in this case, if our feasible target, for us to reach our target, we need this landholder 2 and 3. Here you need 1 and 3, and here 1 and 2. So different combination. And then you sum those up. And the group that has the least cost, that's what you go for. So that's just in a nutshell what the algorithm will do. Okay, so let's go to our findings. We did run this program in GAMS, and we had these 3 different scenarios. And we see that this is now for the first performance indicator. We see that on average, the regulator or conservation agency tends to pay more when there is no insurance. But if you have insurance, whether it's self-funded or subsidized, the cost per unit is actually lower. And now, if you look at the economic cost effectiveness, because this one is what drives that, we see that because the burden has been lifted, so you don't experience that loss. You know, the magnitude of loss has been lifted, so you only pay for your premium. We see that on average, the cost of doing the job is lower, and that's as expected, because you don't have to adjust there's no, here you are adjusting for the possibility that you might have, let's say, a high or a low profit. But here you don't have to worry about that. You only need to worry about the insurance premium that you're paying. So that's what you're factoring in when you're estimating your cost. And we see that overall, with no insurance, you're spending more per unit of environmental target. How about the last bit? We see that with the rent, how much profit the farmers are seeking, those with insurance actually extract more rent. And this is consistent with literature, because we see that if you have low costs, let's say this is the threshold and you're here, you're a low cost. So you have a chance, you have more room to move and seek more rent. But, you know, when you're seeking more rent, but it's lower than, let's say, the maximum acceptable bid, if you like. So we have insurance, but still these people are extracting more rent, but that's relative to those without insurance. How about with subsidy? As I told you, we did simulate from 0 to 100% subsidy. We see that for a given premium rate, for example, this was 10%, as you offer more subsidy, that is, as you give people more income support, premium support, you see that your budget is actually reducing. And this is because what's actually happening, the farmers are reducing their bid, and the amount of that reduction is more than what you're paying. So for example, if you're subsidizing $1, the reduction in bid, the magnitude is actually lower than $1. Yes?
You're making the assumption that farmers are risk averse and that there's some distribution of risk aversion?
So in this case, I did not assume any, oh wait, sorry, come again?
You're assuming that farmers are risk averse, and you're also assuming some distribution of risk aversion?
With insurance, risk aversion apparently doesn't have any influence, because as you see, the income in both low and high is the same, so the risk aversion parameter will cancel, so it is independent.
But with no insurance?
With no insurance, this was considering risk neutral. Yeah, this is risk neutral. I did not consider risk aversion, but the same logic will still hold. Yeah, we did run with different risk aversion parameter, but it apparently doesn't have any influence when you have insurance. So yeah. It shouldn't, because the income in both states are the same, so they'll cancel out. Yeah. So, yeah, but your point you've made is valid. So if you're like more risk averse person, you might actually want to pay, you know, be like, okay, I don't like this risk. I'd rather pay than not take on that risk. So maybe we could compare risk neutral and risk averse bidders, and we see what happens. And so this is with premium rate of 10%, but what if we increase the premium to, let's say, 30%? Okay, so we see that it's actually lower. So it's the same, it follows the same trend. But what we can see here, by subsidizing high-risk people, you actually save more money. This is what we get from interpretation we get from this graph. So, for example, if you take 60% here, subsidy of 60, we see that you're spending per unit about 2.5, but with the same 60 with the at least minimal risk, let's say 10% people, you're spending about, let's say, 3.2. So by subsidizing those who have a risk of facing a high risk, you actually save it more. So as maybe policy tool will be, okay, offer subsidy, variable subsidy rate, because in our case we assumed a flat rate. But if you, let's say, see, well, if you're high-risk people, we'll give you more subsidy than those who have low risk. And some countries have different, they call them variable subsidy rates, and some countries have a fixed rate, and some have no. Like in Australia, we don't have any subsidies at the moment, at least. Okay, so to summarize, we see that in the presence of an insurance mechanism, the risk of suffering loss is eliminated because you've transferred that ideally to an insurance company. And bidders tend to submit low bids, and this ultimately influence the effectiveness of contract allocation. So I thank you very much, and if there's any questions, clarifications.